Today, we are going to discuss about democracy. This includes etymology, definition, brief history, democracy in African, American, European, Asia, and Oceania. Democracy of the people, by the people, for the people. The etymology. Democracy started in the year 507 BC. This is called democratia or rule by the people. From demos means the people and kratos means power.
Definition of democracy, which means rule by the people. The term is derived from the Greek word demokratia, which was coined from demos, which means people, and kratos, which means rule, in the middle of 5th century BCE to denote the political system then existing in some Greek city-states, notably Athens. The other definition for democracy is a system of government in which laws, policies, leadership, and major undertakings of the state or other polity are directly or indirectly decided by the people, a group of historically instituted by only a minority of the population but generally understood since the mid-20th century to include all adult citizens.
Theory of democracy. Pericles. The Athenian leader Pericles described democratic Athens as the school of Hellas. Among the city's many exemplary qualities, he declared, was its constitution which favors the many instead of the few. This is why it is called a democracy. Pericles continued, if we look to the laws, they afford equal justice to all in their private differences. If the social standing, advancement in public life falls to reputation for capacity, class consideration not being allowed to interfere with merit, nor again does poverty bar the way if a man is able to serve the state. He is not hindered by the obscurity of his condition. The freedom which we enjoy in our government extends also to our ordinary life. Aristotle. Aristotle described democracy in terms that will become highly influential in comparative studies of political systems. At the heart of his approach is the notion of a constitution, which he defined as an organization of offices which all the citizens distributes among themselves, according to the power which different classes possesses. He remarks that the best government is often unattainable, and therefore that a true legislator and statesman ought to be acquainted not only with one that which is the best in abstract, but also with two that which is best relatively circumstances. He defined three kinds of government: monarchy, aristocracy, and oligarchy, in his observation that the basis of the democratic state is liberty. Aristotle proposed a connection between the ideas of democracy and liberty that would be strongly emphasized by all later advocates of democracy. Locke. Locke was an unequivocal supporter of political equality, individual liberty, democracy, and majority rule, although his work was naturally rather abstract and not particularly programmatic. It provided a powerful philosophical foundation for much later democratic terrorizing and political programs. According to Locke, no government is legitimate unless it enjoys the consent of the governed, and the consent cannot be rendered except through majority rule. Locke differentiates the various forms of government on the basis of where the people choose to place the power to make the laws. His categories are the traditional ones. If the people retain the legislative power for themselves, together with the power to appoint those who execute the laws, then the form of government is a perfect democracy. If they put the power into the hands of a few select men and their heirs or successors, then it is an oligarchy, or else into the hands of one man, and then it is a monarchy. Montesquieu distinguishes three ideal types of government: monarchy, in which a single person governs by fixed and established laws; despotism, in which a single person directs everything by his own will and caprice; and republican government, which may be of two types depending on whether the body or only a part of the people is possessed of the supreme power. The former being a democracy, the latter an aristocracy. Montesquieu asserts that without strong public virtue, a democratic republic is likely to be destroyed by conflict between various factions, each pursuing its own narrow interests at the expense of the broader public good. Hume, the destructive power of factions was also strongly emphasized by the Scottish philosopher and historian David Hume, whose influence on Madison was perhaps even greater than Montesquieu's, for it was from Hume that Madison seems to have acquired a view about factions that turned the issue of the desirability of larger political association, example, those larger than the city-states, on its head. Rousseau's conception of democracy is narrower than Locke's. In his most influential work of political philosophy, The Social Contract, Rousseau asserts that democracy is incompatible with representative institution, a position that renders it all but irrelevant to nation-states. The sovereignty of the people, he argues, that can be neither alienated or represented. The idea of representative is modern, he wrote. In the ancient republics, the people never had representatives. The moment a people allows itself to be represented, it is no longer free. It is no longer exist. In the area of what he called the liberty of thought and discussion, another freedom crucial to democracy, Mill argued also on utilitarian grounds that legal restrictions on the expression of opinion are never justified. Dewey, democracy is the most desirable form of government because it alone provides the kind of freedom necessary for individual self-development and growth, including the freedom to exchange ideas and opinions with others, the freedom to form associations with others to pursue common goals, and the freedom to determine and pursue one's own conception of the good life. Democracy is more than merely a form of government. However, as Dewey remarks in Democracy and Education, it is also a mode of associated life in which citizens cooperate with each other to solve their common problems through rational meanings in a spirit of mutual respect and goodwill. Habermas, German philosopher and social theorist Jürgen Habermas, employing concept borrowed from Anglo-American philosophy of language, argued that the idea of achieving a rational consensus within a group on questions of either fact or value presupposes the existence of what he called an ideal speech situation. In such a situation, participants would be able to evaluate each other's assertions solely on the basis of reason and evidence in an atmosphere completely free of any non-rational coercive influences, including both physical and physiological coercion. The ideal speech situation can be used as a model of free and open public discussion and a standard against which to evaluate and practices an institution through which large political questions and issues of public policy are decided in an actual democracy. Rawls, the American philosopher John Rawls attempted to develop a non-utilitarian justification of a democratic political order characterized by fairness, equality, and individual rights, reviving the notion of a social contract which had been dormant since 18th century. He imagined a hypothetical situation in which a group of rational individuals are rendered ignorant of all social and economic facts about themselves.
The Brief History. The Athenian leader Cleisthenes introduced a system of political reforms that he called democratia. This leads to abolish the political distinctions between the Athenian aristocrats, who had long monopolized the political decision-making process, and the middle and working-class people. Cleisthenes called the father of democracy. Athenian democracy was the first known democracy in the world. Athenian democracy was a direct democracy made up three important institutions. First was the ecclesia or assembly, a sovereign governing body that wrote laws and dictated foreign policy. It is also the sovereign governing body of Athens. Any member of Demos, any of those adult male citizens, was welcome to attend the meetings of the ecclesia, which were held 40 times per year in a hillside auditorium west of the Acropolis called the Pnyx. Ostracism, in which a citizens could be expelled from the Athenian city-state for 10 years, was the among powers of the ecclesia. The group made decisions by simply majority vote. The second important institution was the Baule or Council of 500, a council of representatives from the Athenian tribe. The Baule was a group of 500 men, 50 each from the 10 Athenian tribes, who served on the council for 1 year. Unlike the ecclesia, the Baule met every day and did most of the hands-on work for governance. It dealt with ambassadors and representatives from other city-states. Its main function was to decide what matters would come before the ecclesia. The 500 men of Baule dictated how the entire democracy would work. And the third important institution was the popular courts or discateria, in which citizens argued cases before a group of lottery-selected jurors. Every day, more than 500 jurors were chosen by lot from a pool of male citizens older than 30. Of all the democratic institutions, Aristotle argued that the discateria contributed most to the strength of democracy because the jury had almost unlimited power. Athenian democracy would survive for only 2 centuries, but it was one of ancient Greece's most enduring contributions to the modern world. By the ideals formed from the cornerstone of all democracies, the ancient Greeks have provided us with fine arts, breathtaking temples, timeless theater, and some of the greatest philosophers. The democracy is their greatest and most enduring legacy. Participation in government. Herodotus, a historian came from Greece, described equality as limited to a small segment of Athenian population in ancient Greece. Only male citizens who were 18 years older can vote in the assembly and participate in the democratic process. Under the democratic system, all male citizens had equal political rights, freedom of speech, and the opportunity to participate directly in political process. The positions such as magistrates and jurors were limited to those over 30 years of age. Women, slaves, and resident foreigners or metoikoi were excluded or not included from the political process. Citizens participate in a direct democracy, whereby they themselves made the decision by which they live. They also actively serve in the institutions that govern them. No judges, no prosecutors, and no lawyers. Citizens directly controlled all over part of political process. The end of Athenian democracy. Democracy which had prevailed during Athens' golden age was replaced by the system of oligarchy in 411 BCE. The constitutional change because, according to Thucydides, it is the only way to win much needed support from Persia against the old enemy Sparta. Though democratic ideals and processes did not survive in ancient Greece, they have been influencing politicians and governments ever since. Modern representative democracies, in opposite to direct democracies, have citizens who vote representatives who create and enact laws on their behalf. Canada, United States, and South Africa are all examples of modern-day representative democracies.
1993, when the democracy started to exercise, which main goal is to have a fair election that is free from racial discrimination. April 27, 1994, the first cast of votes for new constitution. The democracy they exercise is free from economic and racial discrimination. The current democracy also for the health policies, formation of new political party and other institution that protects everyone from their right. South Africa as of today is a representative democratic republic. The framework of the government, the people elects their representative to voice their interests. The president is the leader of the government and the state. According to their constitution, they have three branches. In 1917, Mexican Constitution called for democratic institution. The actual implementation of democratic practices only began about a decade ago. Democracy really began to expand when the PRI, the party that won single-handed rule of nation, was ousted from the presidency in 2000 by the PAN. However, even after the establishment of multi-party system, the PRI retains a stronghold behind the scene. The winner of 2012 presidential election is unlikely to solve the Mexico's many institutional problems. Mexican citizens must work with the government in order to create long-lasting changes that will promote basic democratic processes and the institution through which such processes perform. However, even after the establishment of multi-party system, the PRI retains a stronghold behind the scene. The winner of 2012 presidential election is unlikely to solve the Mexico's many institutional problems. Mexico is a federal presidential representative democratic republic, which the president of the state is also head of the armed forces. The president must be voted by the majority of 31 states and federal district. It holds the position for 6 years and cannot be re-elected. He or she are the one who appoint the federal district's mayor, ambassador, magistrate of the Supreme Court, and consul general. President may also appoint head officials of Army, Navy, and Air Force with approval of Senate and Congress of the Union. The Federal Women Institution wanted to have transparency to information due to rampant cases of corruption. Different groups proposes the change in the government. They also wanted to have negotiation. A lot of citizens wanted to ban against re-election to avoid corruption and dictatorship. Norway create new constitution from monarchy to separation of power principle. It aims to have freedom through the application of new constitution, more importantly, the human rights. Norway become democratic country because they allow their country to be part of Sweden. At the beginning, they are afraid that they will not be independent, but it all went well. Norway becomes the founding father of the Europe situation. It becomes set of inspiration of the other nation, especially the idea of separation of power. They also believe that separation of power is the prerequisite to prevent the abuse of power. It was tied from the idea of Charles de Montesquieu. Liberal voting right of Norway is one of the world's most liberal, which allow everyone to vote. In their National Assembly, which composed of 112 members, there must be no less than 37 farmers. Farmers are considered as one of the major power than civil servant. Norway is a high-income nation with a vibrant private sector and substantial safety net. Discovery of oil and gas off the coast in 1960s gave the country economic boost, and today, Norway is one of the world's leading petroleum exporters. Norway have 5 million people live in a constitutional monarchy. The Prime Minister, the head of the government, is nominally chosen by the monarch with the approval of the legislature. About 80% of people are evangelical Lutheran. According to CIA World Factbook, higher education is mostly free. In 2019 survey conducted among democratic countries, Norway ranked 3 in terms of citizenship satisfaction with attributes respect property right 96.6, progressive 75.8, trustworthy 99.1, gender equality 87.5, Well-distributed political power, 100. Cares about the environment, 92.9. Cares about human rights, 94.2. Religious freedom, 88.1. For the people, by the people. It was the famous line by the Social Democratic Party. It was declared by Philip Schindman on November 19, 1918, 2 months after the transition from monarchy. On their first election after the adoption of Weimar Republic, the right to vote started from 20 years old and the women also allowed to vote. August 11, 1919, when President Friedrich Ebert signed Weimar Constitution that received opposition from military and radical group. It consists of 181 articles which cover structure of German state and the right for religious freedom and how the law should enacted. The Weimar Constitution included this highlight. The German Reich is a republic. The government is made of president, a chancellor, and a parliament, which is Reichstag. The representative of the people must be elected equally every 4 years by all men and women over age 20. The term of the president is 7 years. All orders of the president must be endorsed by the chancellor or the Reich minister. Article 48 allows the president to suspend civil rights and operate independently in an emergency. Two legislative bodies, which is Reichstag and Reichsrat, were formed to represent the German people. All Germans are equal and have the same civil rights and responsibilities. All Germans have the right to freedom of expression, have the right to peaceful assembly, have the right to freedom of religion. There is no state church. State-run public education is free and mandatory for the children. All Germans have the right to private property. All Germans have the right to equal opportunity and earnings in the workplace. The Commonwealth of Australia, or also known as Australia, is a representative democracy. The candidate that may run and vote must be eligible to handle the concern of the state. The representation started when the colony divided themselves and provide their own representation. The institution practices that reflect tradition, the British and the North America, which give the Australia unique system. Australia as of today has its heart the following core defining values: freedom of election and being elected, freedom of assembly and political participation, freedom of speech, expression, and religious belief, rule of law, and other basic human rights. Before, British government handed Hong Kong over in 1997. China agreed allow the region considerable political autonomy for 50 years under the framework known as One Country, Two Systems. In recent years, Beijing has cracked down on Hong Kong's freedom. Drawing international criticism, mass protests erupted in 2014 against Beijing moves. Beijing imposed national security law in 2020 that expands its control over Hong Kong, including giving it broad new powers to punish critics and silence dissenters. Hong Kong is a special administrative region of People's Republic of China that, unlike the mainland's provinces, has certain political and economical freedoms. The former British colony is a global financial capital that has historically thrived off its proximity to China. But in recent years, many in Hong Kong have become concerned with intensifying economic inequality and Beijing efforts to encroach on the city political system, which sparked massive protests in 2019. As China's economic and military might grow, some fear that Hong Kong's significant autonomy could erode. Beijing's passage of new national security law in June 2020 heightened fears of its tightening grip over Hong Kong. Hong Kong has largely free to manage its own affairs, its own based on One Country, Two Systems, a national unification policy developed by Deng Xiaoping in 1980s. The concept was intended to help reintegrate Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau with sovereign China while preserving their unique political and economic systems. After more than a century and a half of colonial rule, the British government returned Hong Kong in 1997. Qing dynasty leaders ceded Hong Kong Island to British Crown in 1842 after China defeat in the First Opium War. Portugal returned Macau in 1999 and Taiwan remains independent.